This is Steve Schmidt with the warning. I'm here in Paris. Earlier today, I was at the Normandy landing beaches, standing on Juno Beach in the museum on Juno Beach, remembering the sacrifice of Canadian forces, standing in the cemetery this morning in Benny-sur-Mer. Canada, of course, a nation and ally threatened by Donald Trump, our neighbor to the north, where there is no knock in the night on the door this evening. There are different categories of Democrats across the country, and I'm very pleased to be able to bring to you a fighting Democrat, one of the finest members of a rising generation of leaders, Congressman Jake Auchincloss, a serious man with a serious message, who's going to talk tonight about the full range of issues that he's engaged in. Of course, he is a member of the House Commerce Committee. It is the most powerful of congressional committees with jurisdiction over anything to do with interstate commerce. He is a Marine major, a veteran of the Marine Corps fighting in Afghanistan in Helmand Province. Congressman Auchincloss, there is a famous Chesty Puller quote. He said, "They're on their left, they're on the right, they're in front of us, they're behind us. They can't escape us now." And many times he pointed out, from a position of being surrounded, his gratitude that his foes would be unable to escape as he was ready to attack in any direction. So, with that, we could talk about the measles, we could talk about Pete Hegseth, but I was with Beto O'Rourke last week in Tulsa, Oklahoma, at an event with 900 people. And one of the things that he pointed out, there hasn't been a measles death in 20 years in America, and there's been two since January 20th. So let me kick it off to you there and talk about the urgency of the public health crisis that's building because of the quackery that's loose in the federal government, and talk about whatever you wish, but this is obviously an urgent moment. People are dying, damage is being done. How do you see it, sir?
Measles was declared eradicated in the year 2000 in the United States, and now we have a politician bringing back a disease that scientists had cured. He's doing that by running a natural experiment. He ran his first natural experiment in Samoa in 2019, in which he derailed their measles vaccination campaign with a mixture of conspiracy and quackery. 83 individuals in Samoa died, the majority of them were children. And now RFK Jr. is running his second natural experiment in the American Southeast, where he is shipping vitamin A instead of MMR vaccines to unvaccinated or under-vaccinated communities. And we're seeing children die of measles. Meanwhile, Steve, I can't get my committee Republican colleagues on Energy and Commerce, which has jurisdiction over RFK, to even so much as hold a hearing to ask him if maybe he wants to recommend the MMR vaccine, the most effective medical invention of the last 100 years, to parents, or if perhaps it was a bad idea to fire the FDA's top vaccine specialists during a measles outbreak, or if he should consider firing the senior staffers around him, who all of them are running businesses on the side that are regulated and reimbursed by CMS and FDA.
Do you have any knowledge about the vaccine status of any of your Republican colleagues' kids? Do any of those members have unvaccinated kids concerning the measles vaccine? Do any of them proudly say there's no way my kid would ever get the measles vaccine?
Here's the challenge, Steve. It's a good question. It's not that RFK says, I myself would not get the MMR vaccine. And it's not necessarily that my Republican colleagues said, I myself would not get the MMR vaccine. What they do is they hide behind this, oh, I'm just asking questions mantra.
Right.
They say, listen, people are saying, not me, but people are saying that the MMR vaccine causes autism. Meanwhile, that's the single most debunked scientific theory of the last 25 years, based on a fraudulent 12-person study in the late 1990s that has been ripped to shreds by any scientist with two neurons to rub together. But they just point to it. Hey, I just want transparency. I just want to ask some questions. What that does is it pumps uncertainty into the public. And when you need 95% of the community vaccinated to have herd immunity for measles because it is so contagious, you don't need very much uncertainty to get to a place where communities lose herd immunity. Who does that hurt? That hurts the kids who are medically compromised and can't actually get the MMR vaccine. It hurts that 5% who really do need the medical exemption from the vaccine. Now they're exposed because the nation's top health official is allowing a measles vector to spread irresponsibly.
When you talk about these people with their businesses and we talk about the immense wealth and privilege of all of these people who are doing this, I'd like to point out, drove across the country last month from Palm Springs through uh, El Paso to Fort Worth to Vicksburg, up through the Natchez Trace to Tupelo to Nashville. In Mississippi, for instance, one of the few places in the country where you're regularly going to see a syphilis billboard. So, as a moral proposition, do you ever say to your Republican colleagues that this, what's happening, impacts disproportionately poor people who are misinformed and then sentenced to die? And we have kids dying, and you can stop it. And might you consider doing that? And I just wonder, right, there is, and I'd be inclined to yell, you are a Marine officer who has dealt with the full menagerie of the human personality under the most difficult and stressful moments, including foreign personalities. And I'm just wondering, how do you approach them at a psychological level as a Marine, as a congressman, as an American, uh, to
Yeah.
do the right thing? What's the approach?
Two things. One, to your first question, we have been very clear as Democrats on the Energy and Commerce Committee that we hold not just RFK, but congressional Republicans personally accountable for every measles death in this country because they could stop it if they wanted to, and it's on them. And they are on the record now as denying a hearing to put RFK himself on the record. But number two, you asked about where do I apply lessons from military strategy to this moment that we're in. One thing that Marine officers learn is the concept of a center of gravity and a critical vulnerability. Think of the center of gravity as like the kneecap, and the critical vulnerability as the back of your knee. The idea is that in general, your opponent's strength is also an indication of their weakness. And the reason I say that is what RFK Jr. and Callie Means and that crew, Mark Hyman, their center of gravity is corruption. They have gone out and argued that chronic disease in this country is driven by the corruption of pharma and big food tied in with regulators. And he stood in front of the Food and Drug Administration's career scientists and called them sock puppets for industry. That center of gravity also tells you what their critical vulnerability is because they themselves are corrupt. They are projecting their own corruption onto the civil servants who are here to keep Americans safe and healthy, onto the civil servants whose job it is to detect toxins and eye drops and keep you from needing a corneal transplant, who are there to detect and help with lead in the water supply, like is happening in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, right? These individuals are corrupt themselves. Callie Means is out there running a tax laundering HSA business and at the same time is changing benefits design at HHS to help his own business. You got Brad Smith, the head of healthcare Doge, whose business, Main Street Health, is regulated and reimbursed by CMS. He's in charge of hiring and firing his own regulators. They all have special employee exempt status. There's no transparency or disclosure, and there has not been a single ounce of oversight from congressional Republicans over this.
Um, do you have the ability in the minority to compel a Cali Means to testify before the committee?
We're working on that right now. The short answer is, can I get a subpoena? No, I can't. We need congressional Republicans to vote for subpoenas. But we are not without tools and without influence, right? And we need to start using the bully pulpit afforded even to a minority on these committees in the same manner that judiciary has started to do, to put the spotlight on the self-dealing and corruption of these individuals, because ultimately where they are vulnerable is in their private sector interests. And we cannot allow them to take on this mantra of fighting corruption when the only thing they're doing is bringing back infectious disease and enriching themselves.
When Democrats win an overwhelming majority in the House in this next election cycle, and you are sitting in the majority, will you be able to compel the testimony of Cali Means and all of the people around Robert Kennedy under oath before the Commerce Committee?
Steve, we will peel the bark off of these individuals in the majority.
What message do you have for these people who have a lack of imagination, that with each day the horizon lurks closer, and though it cannot yet be seen, it is coming?
It's the same message that RFK issued to FDA scientists when he told them, save your records and pack your bags. Same message to the Secretary of Health and Human Services. We are going to hold him accountable for his quackery, his conspiracy, and his corruption.
At what point do you look at this through a moral lens, through your training as a Marine officer, and say this is a form of crime that I would regard this if I was in the HHS bureaucracy and I'm implementing illegal orders that are in the end uh, going to cause human suffering, and I'm doing so willfully, that I'm complicit in something here that I'm going to be held accountable for, and that through an ethical lens. Uh, this is a disaster that we're seeing across the board, but we're going to be teaching ethics in a way that we haven't talked about it for a long time, certainly not in your lifetime. And you've been trained in the matter. I just would love to hear you talk about ethics and their collapse and the responsibility that each person has. If you're a government employee and you're chaining up a Canadian actress like she's Hannibal Lecter and treating her like she would be treated in Putin's Russia, and you think that you will do so, and the day will never come when the American arm of justice doesn't reach out for you, it's either I'm badly wrong about my assumptions on something, and I'd like you to clarify them for me because my faith is misplaced, or I'd like you to set a lot of people right out there who can't seem to also see that over the horizon lies a moment where people are going to be answerable for the things that they did, and following orders of RFK and Cali Means won't cut it.
I agree with you, Steve. I think the area where this is most immediately pressing is actually not in HHS, though. It's in the Department of Justice, and it's with the return of Mr. Garcia from El Salvador, because the administration wants to make this issue a question about border security or about immigration. And you and I both support a strong and secure border. We support this as a nation of laws where people have to have an orderly process to become citizens. We support deporting criminals after due process. What we also support, though, is the very core notion of American freedom. If your feet are on American soil, you get to stand in front of a judge against the awesome power of the state and trust that the facts of the matter will be considered with impartial application of the law. And this administration has admitted that they deprived somebody on American soil of due process and of habeas corpus. That is an assault upon freedom, not just his freedom, but all of our freedom. He is now threatening to do that for what he calls homegrown problems. The other word for homegrown, Steve, is citizen. He's threatening to do this against citizens of the United States. And when this judge, and I think this is going to come, begins to issue orders of civil and criminal contempt against officials, they need to know that they cannot be protected by the dear leader. That whether it takes 5 years or 15 years, any official who disobeys a court order will be held to account for it.
When you think about the immorality around the world of American food aid rotting on shelves, the medicine not being distributed that will cause death, that will lead to political instability, that will lead to all manner of atrocity and adverse outcomes for the security of the country, when you look at the damage being done in this moment, I got the governor of Michigan hiding in the Oval Office. That was her instinct under fire. And that can't be unseen. And it's not your responsibility to explain it. Got Gavin Newsom calling anybody who said what you just said about Mr. Garcia a sheep. And they don't understand that we can only talk about one thing today, and that's got to be the tariffs, because today is the day that Gavin has decided, well, I'm going to come off the Charlie Kirk show and the Steve Bannon show, and I'll show a different side of the show, and I'll do the lawsuit show. And so I won't meet the fight where the fight is needed to be met. Instead, I'll maneuver a bit around tactically, right? So in this whole deal right now, I want to envision something, right? I want to envision you being president of the United States, 4 years time, coming in on January 20th, and looking ahead, right, to the damage that will be done between tomorrow, the beginning of the 250th anniversary celebrations, the start of the American Revolution, and the end of Trump's term. All the damage that will be done, all the alliances that will be frayed, all of those things. What is going to need to be said to the world and to the American people in the aftermath? And what is the first thing that will need to be asserted about the people who did this, who are screaming down the American people, calling an innocent man without evidence a terrorist from the Oval Office, chaining people at the border, disregarding their civil rights? What will need to be said?
The next president will need to recommit America to freedom. The four freedoms: free enterprise, free minds, free elections, and freedom from fear. And the next president is going to have to build back Americans' faith in those four freedoms through a concrete agenda that ranges from supporting the rule of law to ending corporate capture in Washington, D.C., to holding politicians accountable through election reform, to ending the attention fracking of social media corporations that has polarized our society and eroded our sense of civic discourse, to unlocking and unleashing American builders and doers to get stuff done in this country. It needs to be an agenda of freedom, because Americans know what Democrats are against. They know we stand against Donald Trump, and we do have to rally to that banner. But they also need to know what we are for, and we are for freedom.
Now I'm going to pretend I'm your chief of staff. And so the oligarchs have come for your inauguration, and they've been stuffed over at the EEOB, where they've been waiting in a small and terrible room with a lemon cleansing scent for many, many hours. And you are now ready to see them. And so there was a premise about these tech companies going back, oh, say 15 years, the motto of Google being do no evil, and Facebook, this was harmless, and all of it. And so they have bared their teeth at the American Eagle. As FDR said, they have tried to clip the wings of the American Eagle. Not an army of 50,000, not legions, a small number of billionaires who have conspired to take something that does not belong to them. Historically, when this has happened, when there has been, through what FDR calls his inventive genius of man, this formation of new monarchies, new dukedoms, we smash them, we break them up. And tomorrow is the 250th shot, 250th anniversary of the shot heard around the world. Talk to me as I bring them in to the Oval Office, what you're going to say to them about what's about to happen to their companies and why. Because I believe it will be an occasion for honesty and transparency, unless I have that wrong.
I would divide them into two different groups. The first group would be the health insurance and social media executives. And that conversation would be short and it would be brutal. I would tell the health insurance executives that their days of price gouging Americans, of abusing pharmacists and physicians and nurses, of jacking up premiums and copays are over, and that their days of profiteering off of high healthcare costs are behind us as Americans. They have been bleeding the economy dry, and now we are going to bleed them dry. And then I would tell the social media corporations that they have become the wealthiest and most powerful corporations in the history of the world by turning our children's attention span into products to be sold off to the highest advertising bidder, and that we are going to sanction and tariff them in a manner that cuts their digital empires down to size, and that we are not going to allow their screen time to rob our family time any longer. Then I'd bring the rest of the businesses in and I'd say, I don't care if you're a big business. I want business to be successful in America. I want small businesses to become big businesses. I want big businesses to pay their workers well and to create new products. That's what we are. We're a proud capitalist, market oriented society, but you're going to play by the same rules as everybody else in this country plays by, small businesses and workers alike. You are not getting any more special treatment in Washington.
Prime Minister Carney brought you up right now and said Parliament needs to hear from an American. What do you say to the Canadian Parliament?
That the American people in January did not wake up and decide that Russia was their friend and Canada was their enemy. That the United States and Canada have the longest undefended border in the world because we are core allies, not allies of convenience, not economic allies, but allies with shared values. And that no amount of inanity and abuse from the White House is going to change the cultural ties and the democratic ties between our two great peoples. And that this too shall pass.
Where's the first place you take the plane to a foreign country to start the tour as president of reconciliation?
My first phone call is to Canada, which is traditional for American presidents. The first plane trip is to Nigeria, I think. Nigeria is going to be the third biggest country in the world by 2050. Half its population is under the age of 18. It's a media and cultural and economic dynamo already and becoming ever more so. But the global south, of which Nigeria is one of the cornerstones, has been ignored, not frankly just by the Trump administration, but by a lot of previous administrations. And our ability, I think, to get Nigeria linked into and building on top of the United States operating system as opposed to the Chinese Communist Party operating system would be a bellwether for the rest of the global South.
Talk about your affiliations in life and what they mean. And I want to talk about three. I want to talk about four of them specifically. Uh, you are a United States Marine. What does that mean to you?
Officer candidates for the United States Marine Corps walk by a statue with the simple statement, leadership by example. And I think
Ductus
that
exemplis.
that's right. And that to me is the core of it, is whether it as a leader within my office of my staff, whether it is as a representative of 800,000 people in the halls of Congress, or whether it is as a leader in public service, my example has to be uh, one that I would feel proud of being emulated.
What does it mean to be a member of the United States House of Representatives?
Uh,
And the first time you walked under the Capitol through Statuary Hall as a member.
Steve, I grew up with the portraits of the founding fathers on my bedroom wall. I didn't have athletes or musicians. I had James Madison and Franklin and Hamilton and Washington. And so you can imagine walking into the House chamber and seeing the grand portrait of the signing of the Constitution and what that means to me, and the privilege of a lifetime it is to get to be the voice and vote for fellow citizens, especially at this tumultuous time in our history. That was the first time I walked into the Capitol. The second time I walked into the Capitol, though, was January 6, 2021. And there I saw an insurrection against our Constitution. And I saw Republicans then walk back into that chamber and step over broken glass in order to vote against the certification of an election that they knew was free and fair. And unfortunately, what that has left me with is a deep cynicism about the ability of my Republican colleagues to ever stand up to Donald Trump. They are not going to do the right thing by following their conscience. They're going to do the right thing because we beat them.
So I agree completely. History teaches us that two of the greatest institutions in the history of the world in terms of the advancement of human dignity and freedom are the Republican parties and the Democratic parties of the United States of America. These two institutions that form a duopoly that drive a lot of reciprocal craziness. When I look at the Republican Party, it became a shell and then the vessel of a new rising fascism. And so this former Republican now fully embraces as a member the Democratic Party, right? As a vessel of not America's perfections, but of the possibility of redemption from America's gravest sins. And so I wanted to ask, what does the Democratic Party mean to you as someone who's not yet 40, but is already a leader of it, will become a greater leader in it, and a more important voice in terms of defining it? What does the Democratic Party mean to you?
It's what the Democratic Party means to me right now and what the Democratic Party could be. What the Democratic Party means to me right now is the bulwark for the rule of law, the Constitution, and individual freedom against the authoritarian impulses of Donald Trump. But that fight, if we're being candid and self reflective, that fight has exhausted the Democratic Party. We have put all of our energy and all of our power behind wrestling with this would-be dictator. And it's a righteous fight and we need to do it, but it has exhausted us and it has depleted us of new and big and bold ideas for the future. And so what the Democratic Party has to do right now, and this is a challenge, is on the one hand, we do have to fight Donald Trump. We have to contest his abuse of power. And we also have to explain to the American public what we would do with power should we be given that power. Because Americans will vote for the party or the individual that they understand, what are you going to do on day one? And right now, Americans know what Democrats are against. Righteously, we're against Donald Trump, but they don't know what we're for. And that is why I think we need to become the party for freedom, the party for free elections, meaning not just that the elections are not rigged, but that every single politician, every single election cycle stands before voters, and those voters have a real choice about whether that politician is going to get sent back to office or right now. Because right now, 35 out of 435 seats in the House of Representatives are contested. The other 400 are not in a general election. Democratic Party has to be in favor of free enterprise. We got to build stuff in this country. We got to build nuclear power and housing and 1,000 tech voc high schools and more ships than the Chinese Navy. We got to cut the regulations that make it too hard to do that. And we got to stop the corporate capture of Washington that has locked in rules that help the big guys, but not the little guys. This party has to be in favor of free minds. Free minds. We got to reject the cancel culture of the left. And we also have to fund the science and the education that allows people to truly explore the questions that can't be answered that make life worth living. We are the party of freedom. That is our agenda going forward.
I want to talk about the morale crisis that I think is coming in the U.S. military. And I think it's acidic. I think that most people don't begin to comprehend it. But Donald Trump has injected a pancreatic cancer into institutions that, whatever imperfections they may have, and they certainly have them, but are based on codes of honor. And this is 250th anniversary year of the U.S. Navy, the U.S. Marine Corps, the U.S. Army, all being celebrated this year in these institutions. And the entire training of the military, as I comprehend it, is we're going to teach you about authority by teaching you about responsibility and connecting these things to the concept of accountability. And the whole ethos of the military, particularly the naval services, is built around accountability for the captain. It's inescapable, it's unavoidable, it's fated. If you take that authority, what comes with it is accountability. And the Trump doctrine, the dogma, which is always true in all autocratic systems, is that responsibility and accountability are inverse propositions, that the more responsibility you have, the less accountability you have. The less responsibility you have, the more accountability you have, right? So you can have one of the greatest intelligence failures, right? You have the giving up, and this really hasn't been talked about, but you understand this just from basic common sense, right? Steve Witkoff in Moscow, during a military operation against an Iranian proxy force, gave away the position of the planes and the carriers during the attack on unsecured communications. There's no accountability whatsoever. And so, in any environment where you add up favoritism plus favoritism of outcomes and the denial of accountability as a dogma, and then, right, we come into graduation season, right, where Trump will speak to a service academy where the entire education has been a refutation of Donald Trump's life, where Pete Hegseth will go speak at one of the service academies. How does all of this accrue in 4 years' time? Because the U.S. military is going to be a very damaged institution within the next couple of years. And or tell me that I'm wrong about that.
I have the great privilege of getting to nominate young men and women in my district to the United States Service Academies, West Point, Annapolis, Coast Guard. In fact, just this morning, I called a young man uh, who was going to the United States Naval Academy. And Steve, these kids are so impressive. It's enough to give you hope for the future. I mean, he's like a three-letter varsity athlete. He's 3.9 GPA. He's volunteering. He's in leadership development courses, and he wants to dedicate at least the first part of his career to the United States. And he could do a lot of other things. And I see that story over and over again. That gives me hope that the United States military can withstand the depredations and incompetence of these senior leaders. But to your point, they face significant threats. The first threat is domestic. I tell all these young men and women on the phone, remember, you do not swear an oath to a political leader. You do not swear an oath to a party. You swear an oath to the Constitution of the United States. And young officers get that, but the cabinet and the Trump leadership, as you said, clearly do not. That is a major threat to the United States military and its 250-year tradition of nonpartisan uh, uh, constitutional duty. The second threat we have is that the United States military globally has long been viewed, as we used to say in the Marine Corps, no better friend, no worse enemy. And the problem with this junior varsity squad, whether it's Hegseth or Rubio or Walls or Gabbard, is that the Russians and the Iranians and the Chinese, they think we're a joke. I mean, the Russians, they're bad people, but they're not idiots. The people that Putin is sending to negotiate are hardened apparatchiks who have spent 25 years in global negotiations. And they're looking across the table at Hegseth, at Witkoff,
Yeah.
and they're saying, we used to deal with real people. When the Americans said something, we took it seriously. We used to, and this is not a Democrat or Republican thing, both administrations used to do this. We used to deal with real people. And now we're looking at this guy who ran two small nonprofit veterans organizations into the ground, who can barely take care of himself, much less a 3 million person military. And this is the guy we're negotiating with? I mean, it's humiliating. And you are right, it's going to damage our reputation. But it's going to be these young officers that I talked to on the phone. It's going to be these young officers who help us resuscitate it.
Um, when you're kind of sitting there right now in this moment, how do you think Trump escalates the situation from here and over the summer? Meaning, we start today with where he is with the Fed chair. Let's take
Yeah.
it to Labor Day. What do you see happening?
Uh, I'm always reluctant to prognosticate about this guy and his machinations, but let me put forward this general theme. I think on the economy, and whether that means tariffs or Powell, I think what we will see is that the bond market is going to be the biggest check on his worst impulses. That's what happened with his initial tariff rollout. The 10-year Treasury bond market, a weak Treasury auction, that was sort of the emperor has no clothes moment for him. Now we have a debt limit ceiling coming up. We've got much more Treasury auctions coming up. And when Besant looks at a weak Treasury auction and he looks at yields going in the wrong direction, that is going to be, I think, a significant check on Trump's maneuverability within the economy. The area that I see him going truly off the rails is on immigration. Immigration has always been, since back in 2015 till today, immigration is the fundamental driver of the MAGA movement and of his appeal to his base. And I expect we are going to see more cruelty. I expect that we're going to see more lawlessness. I expect that we are going to see more xenophobia in his approach to immigration as his public approval on his economic handling, as public approval on his foreign policy handling start to deflate, as civil society starts to demonstrate solidarity and opposition to him. He's going to double down on the one area that got him elected in 2016, that I would argue got him elected in 2024, and that is immigration. He's going to use immigrants as scapegoats.
Do you have any worry about him federally deputizing as marshals any elements of extremist militias?
So, under the Insurrection Act, you can squint and look at the legal paths to do that. It would be litigated immediately. It would require compliant governors. So it would probably be more of a red state phenomenon, probably a border state phenomenon. But absolutely, I mean, this is part of the authoritarian playbook, right? You try to bully the courts, the media, and opposition politicians, and then you try to co-opt other forms of organized violence in society outside of the state-driven military in order to create a culture and climate of fear.
What do you, as we have about 10 minutes left, and I want to just give you some time to just talk about whatever you want to talk about, but what do you say to the leaders of big law, for example, which to me, at the first instance of testing, at really a ludicrous set of claims that you give me an absurdist amount of money, and as opposed to saying, okay, I really don't want to be in litigation here, but he gives me no choice, they all surrender to him. And so you have the people in the country at high levels, leading law firms, leading media companies, that are the first to capitulate, right? The people that have the most, right, are the first to get in line. And ordinary people are the first to get in the getting screwed line. And I just wonder how you process across the depth of it all the total capitulation, right? And lack of willingness to really fight back and to stand up, not because you want to fight, not because you're aggressive, but you're compelled to fight back against the aggression being waged against you. And so, as a Marine officer, right, you've thought about fighting. I just like, how do you frame all of this in this moment with so many people? When I think you look and say, well, obviously you should fight, have chosen to say, nah, not me.
The first rule of contesting an authoritarian regime is do not obey in advance. When you obey in advance, you induce more of the autocratic behavior. And what we are seeing, thankfully, is not total capitulation. I would challenge that actually, Steve. You are seeing capitulation from some of the law firms, Paul Weiss most notoriously, but you are seeing litigation and fighting back from firms like Wilmer Hale. And my expectation, my hope, my work is that we have to create cross-sectoral solidarity. And this is a playbook that has worked well in other countries that are dealing with this scenario. Is it's not simply good enough for one law firm to join the amicus brief for another law firm. What you need is for business executives and law firms and universities and nonprofit leaders and social service providers and politicians, both in the opposition and in the ruling party, to lock arms. But to do that requires discipline. And this is something I think Democrats have to be careful of. Democrats over the last 15 years have had a habit of saying, we believe in 10 things. And if you agree with us on 9 things, there's the door. That is not the moment we are in right now. Right now, to build this solidarity, we have to say, fundamentally, it's about one thing. It's about saying no to Donald Trump. And if you're an evangelical voter and you agree with us on nothing else besides that, welcome in. We're going to work with you right now. We'll disagree later, but we're going to work with you right now. And the same thing with the business community and the legal community in the universities. We disagree on a whole host of stuff. We need a single tent pole that we can build a wide tent on, but it's got to be one. It cannot be this this all or nothing approach that Democrats too often have taken.
Who is the greatest Democratic leader in the history of the country?
So the Democratic Party was founded in 1828 by Andrew Jackson. So it's 200 years of history now to look at. I don't think there's just one. I think,
I should have made it your favorite.
let me give you two answers, which I know is not technically allowed, but I'm going to do it anyway. Let me give you
Sure.
two answers. The first, and I'm channeling him when I talk about the four freedoms, is Franklin Delano Roosevelt, because he took America at a moment of depression and aggression, and he rallied the country to our strengths. And he talked about the four freedoms, and he rallied not just Americans, but really the world to these four freedoms. Democrats have to recommit to four freedoms now for the 21st century, not for the 20th century. The second, though, is actually not a Democrat at all. It is the Whig Party. And the reason I say the Whig Party is that the Whigs were the party that defeated Andrew Jackson and his crew, and Andrew Jackson was the original MAGA. Andrew Jackson in the 1830s is the politician who really fused Christian nationalism with economic populism in a way that was the prologue to the MAGA movement. And the Whigs beat him with a hard cider log cabin campaign that did not attempt to be Diet Coke to the Coca-Cola of Jacksonianism, but offered its own vision for economic development and rule of law in this country. And we have to channel those Whigs and the hard cider and log cabin campaign that they ran to defeat Donald Trump and to offer a new agenda.
A lot of people out there are afraid, and no small membership of this community falls in that category. So I just want you to close it out with whatever you'd like to say, but if you could, just mention fear for a moment and how to deal with it. It's something you've had to deal with, and I was always taught that courage is not the absence of fear. It's the idea that there is something more important than that fear, or something that's worth fighting for. And so over to you, Congressman. Thank you very much for being with us tonight.
Steve, thank you for having me on. Fear is something that people do alone. Courage is something that people do together. And that's why we as Americans need to rally together to not let fear stifle who we are as Americans and the kind of lives we want to pursue under the Constitution, but but rather join together to give one another courage.
Well, that's a perfect place to end it. Congressman Jake Auchincloss, thank you very much. And everybody, thank you for being with us tonight. I'm Steve Schmidt. This is The Warning. I invite you to join this community where I promise to be honest, blunt, and direct about what is happening in this country. America is in crisis. Follow and subscribe to this channel and on Substack. Thank you.